Hi, and welcome to the Mediterranean Project. My name is Brandy Meilenberg. I am a licensed respiratory therapist. I am a functional integrative nutrition doctoral candidate, and I am the owner and founder of Chisira Olio di Oliva, which is my olive brand. So I started this Mediterranean project for a lot of reasons, but mostly it's to answer all the questions that I get from many of you out there that I haven't really had a good source or a good place to answer these questions for you that is comprehensive and a normal place that you can just go and find the answer to your question. So that's why we're here. So the very first question that I'm doing today is how and why is extra virgin olive oil from Italy different from extra virgin olive oil from California? So I put the title out there a few hours ago saying that this would be coming soon. And as I suspected, people get very upset about this topic, but just so you know, it's one of your questions. I am not here to tell you specifically one is better than the other, but I am here to tell you the differences and why they are different and what makes them different. So to answer your question, first off, I want to talk a little bit about environment. So olive trees are like any other plant in the world, just like all the plants that are around me here in this screen. They all have a climate that they prefer. They all grow naturally in certain climates and certain atmospheres, and some of them do really well in hot weather, some of them do really well in cold weather. We all know this about plants. People in Florida can grow oranges really well, where people in, say, Alaska don't really have that benefit of being able to grow oranges really well unless you have a very amazing greenhouse system, which makes it possible. But naturally, in nature, they don't just grow like they would in Florida because of the different climates and atmospheres. So olive trees are exactly the same. Olive trees grow really well in the Mediterranean basin region. And the reason for that is because the microclimate in that area provides them with the arid atmosphere, the amount of water that they need, and all of the things that help them grow and thrive. That's why there are olive trees around the entire Mediterranean basin that are hundreds of years old, is because that is where they grow and thrive. Now, the olive tree is native to that area because it was imported, transported, shared, distributed, moved, planted across the entire Mediterranean basin for millennia. And the reason for that was because people back when, much like we do now, discovered that there was something really amazing about olive trees, olive oil, olives. They just knew that there was something really special and magical about this tree. And so what they did is they started planting it. They started finding different ways to use it. Of course, that evolved and changed over time as they had different ways of pressing the olives, different ways of processing them, putting the olives in brine so that they could eat them, different ways to do things with this tree. But initially, the tree was used in its entirety, bark, leaves, olives, olive pits, olive oil, all the things were used for different purposes. They were used medicinally, they were used for hydration, they were used for tools, they were used in building material. They used this tree for so many different things. Over time, they started learning that without even the technology we have today, they started learning the nutritional benefits and the amazing healing power that this tree produced. And so then it just became more and more widespread. The thing is that the olive tree does really well in the Mediterranean basin because it was spread so heavily, because they really saw the quality and they wanted that with them, but also that climate adjusted and changed and altered so much over many, many decades that the trees started finding areas that they really thrived in. So that's why you see large amounts of olive plantations in Italy. You see them in Croatia. You see them in Spain. You see them in the Middle East. They're in a bunch of different areas where the climate and the microclimate are arid and really good for those trees. Now, with that being said, someone down the line, and I don't know exactly who that first person was. There's a lot of people out there that claim to be or claim to know who that was. I don't know, so I'm not going to say. Someone out there decided that they were going to try and grow olive trees in America. And so this happened several different times in many different states, many different processes throughout the creation of the United States. Lots of times it was found that these trees would not thrive. They would not live through the winters. They would do really well maybe in the summer, but then they never made it. They never produced olives. They would wither and die. And so it really became clear that they weren't going to thrive in the climate that we have in the United States. Like I said, over time, someone discovered that they felt these certain regions in California may have the microclimates available to keep these trees alive and to help them thrive. They've succeeded. And so there are olive plantations, there are groves, there are companies, there are a large number of people who are growing olive trees successfully in certain areas of California because they were able to mimic those arid conditions in a way that allowed the trees to survive. And so now we have California olive oil, just like we have olive oil from Italy, we have olive oil from Croatia, olive oil from Spain, olive oil from Tunisia. We have it from all sorts of different regions. The other thing to keep in mind is there are over 100 different types of olives, which means there are over 100 different types of olive trees. And each of those, while they're the same type of species, they require the same types of microclimates. Some of them are a little bit more hardy to colder weather. Some of them are not hardy to colder weather at all. Each of these olives have a different flavor profile and they grow slightly different, even though in a lot of ways they grow the same. So what happened over time is that certain areas really started to favor or focus on certain varieties of olives. And what happened was those typical types of olives are what you see the most in certain regions. So you can think there are you think of Greece, there are olives that are very specific to Greece. Their olive oil are made from those specific types of olives. The table olives that you eat there are typically those same types of olives. And so Greece kind of developed its own region of olive growth as well. And so they have a specific type that they really like that is culturally significant to them. The same has happened in different regions. So Italy has various varieties that are very Italian, and the same reason that Africa and Spain have different varieties that are very much culturally significant to them. It's not to say that those varieties can't grow and don't grow in other regions. They absolutely do, and people do transplant and plant those trees in other areas. But there are definitely types of olives that are specific to certain types of regions. The other thing that's important to note is the difference between, say, Italian olive oil and California olive oil is many of the commercial or private, or it doesn't even matter really. Most of the groves in Italy have been growing for decades, meaning the trees are well established, some of them hundreds of years old, many of them decades old. The trees are healthy, they're well established. The people who are growing them, the people who are harvesting them, the people who are caring for them, the agricultural community in Italy is very, very passionate about their olive trees, their olive oil, and they take meticulous care of all of those plants. Not saying that's not what California does. I'll get to that. So they're very well established. That's not to say that there aren't brand new olive groves and brand new trees in Italy. There absolutely are. Brand new trees are being planted every day. So you can definitely find olive groves across Italy that have trees that are saplings, trees that are only a couple years old, trees that are less than 10 years old. But the majority of the big groves that the olives and the olive oil are coming from are very well established ancient trees. In California, because it's a fairly new region for olives in comparison to the Mediterranean basin, much of the trees, much of the groves that are in California are, in comparison, considered young, meaning that those trees are not hundreds of years old. Those trees haven't been established in those areas for multiple generations, for many, many decades. We will get to that point over time, but right now, the California olive agricultural community is fairly young in comparison to the Mediterranean basin. And that takes time. There's nothing you can do to speed that process up. Those trees have to live, they have to grow, they have to establish, they have to be well maintained and cared for. And eventually they do have the potential to reach a couple hundred years old, just like the trees in other parts of the countries. So what that means is there are different nutritional values that come out of some of these trees. And that goes back to the types of trees you're growing, the age of the trees, what type of olives are you growing, and all of that goes back to climate. So when we talk about the climate in Italy being very close to the climate in California in a way that makes it possible to grow these trees, that's one small piece. Climate, weather, heat, temperature, it's a very, very important piece, but that's one small piece. That plays into how much of a harvest are you going to get that season? How many flowers are going to grow? Are you going to have a late frost that's going to kill them all? Is it going to be too wet of a year to produce fruit? Is it going to be too dry of a year to produce fruit? Those are things that are very, very important, that are always out of our control, but have to be considered as well. The other thing that is very different between Italy and California is the soil. And there's not much you can do about that. You can amend the soil all you want. You can add different nutrients, minerals, vitamins. You can bring in soil from wherever you want, amend it into the soil. But the reality is the soil is the soil of that area, of that continent, of its environment. So what makes Italy really special is it's a very ecological continent. So if you think about just the history of Italy in just a short few decades, and then you think back thousands of years, there's obviously been volcanic activity that happened millennia ago, but there's also volcanic activity that happens today. There is geothermal activity that's happening in large parts of northern Italy that affects the soil. That's really great things. People have found wonderful ways to use this geothermal water and energy, but that's something that's constantly happening. It's a very ecological area that has hot springs. It has lots of leftover ash and debris from volcanoes. It has millennia of um, things that have come off of the Mediterranean Sea, off the Adriatic Sea, off of just storms blowing in off the coast, water that has come higher in some decades, lower in other decades, leaving deposits of shells and microorganisms from the oceans, things like that. There's also, of course, there are prehistoric lakes that were once there that have dried up. So all of these things go into play on what creates the soil. And so the soil has very specific to the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean Sea is very different from the Pacific Ocean in a lot of ways. Yes, they're giant bodies of water with sea life and all of that. But there's a lot of different things that make that up. There are different storm systems. There's different weather patterns that happen off of them. And so you have to consider that the salt from the Mediterranean, the minerals that are blown from different storm systems, the different types of microorganisms that may be blown onto the soil or have come up through floods and raging rivers and all those kinds of things that get deposited over millions and millions of years in that soil. And so the soil in Italy will never be the same as the soil in California. It just has had a very different life cycle, a very different ecological lifespan, and different types of materials have settled in each area. What's beautiful about Italy is that volcanic activity, while it's dangerous and terrifying for people, is sometimes fantastic for plants after a while. Obviously, when it's spewing, not great. But once it's settled, there's so much minerals and vitamins and just fantastic things that get stuck in the soil that do wonderful things for plants. And the olive trees love that. And so there's so much of that that gets pulled into those trees that make them healthy, make them strong, and also contribute to the nutritional value of the olives and the fruit that grows on those trees. Now, if we go back to California, there's also the Pacific Ocean, which again blows salt water, blows microorganisms. There's been flooding, there's been storm systems, there's earthquakes, there is geological activity there as well. They're just very different. So if you took a soil sample from each area, if you picked an olive farm, let's say, took a soil sample from each one, you're going to get very different readings. You're going to get different mineral deposits. You're going to get um, different aspects of magnesium, phosphorus, different things that have been left there over time. And the further down you dig, the different that's going to get. And so that goes into play with these trees as well, and especially goes into play when we're talking about fruits' nutritional content. The same can be said if you went to Florida and you picked a Florida orange and you ate it. The way that it tastes, its nutritional compound, the way that it grows, the way that it looks is very different if you took that same exact tree and you grew it in a greenhouse in Alaska. It's going to look the same visually. The orange might look a little bit smaller. Maybe it looks a little bit different. Maybe the color's not as bright or vibrant. It's just because it's a different environment. And so the tree has to adapt to that. In a lot of ways, when that adaptation happens, it affects the fruit. And so we just have to know that because there are different environments, while similar, because there are different soil types, while they may be somewhat similar, they are different. And so they're going to produce different outcomes. Not to say that the olives in Italy are just 100 times better than the ones in California. I'm not saying that. I think California has done a fantastic job in cultivating these trees. I think they've done a fantastic job in understanding the agriculture and the process that it takes to grow these trees. I think that they have done a great job in understanding olive oil. I think a lot of people from the Mediterranean basin have actually moved to California and started their own olive companies here in the United States. And I think they bring with them a lot of amazing generational knowledge to that industry. And I think that's fantastic too. So I'm definitely not saying that one is necessarily better than the other. I'm just saying that they are different for various reasons. And those are just a few reasons that I explained. The other question that comes with this, why are Italian olives or extra virgin olive oil different than California? A kind of follow-up question I often get to this is, isn't it better to eat local produce or food? Yes, it's always better to eat locally grown, in season produce, fruits, vegetables, those types of things. But, and here's the caveat, um, olives are not actually local, if you want to think of it that way. They're not actually local to California. So yes, they're great to eat when they're in season. Again, just like Italy, you want to eat olive oil that is fresh pressed right off the tree. So it needs to be off the tree and in the press within hours, not days, not months, not weeks, to get the most nutrient density. And you want to make sure that you're doing that at peak freshness. And so that's in season fruit. Um, it really doesn't make sense to consider local when you're talking about olive oil though, because it for a large part of the world, the planet, not just the United States, not just the Mediterranean basin, not just, but the entire world, for a large portion of the world, it is impossible to get local olives because the trees will not grow there. But that does not diminish the health benefits, the nutritional capacity, all of the wonderful things that come with high quality, real extra virgin olive oil. And so the local part kind of has to go out of the way when you're thinking about that. And you really have to look for reputable companies and high quality olive oil that comes from high quality olives that were grown in high quality groves and businesses that understand agriculture and understand the growth process of the olives. So, so just as a quick follow-up to that, it's really difficult for the majority of the world to get local olives. So I didn't want to do a whole session just on that because it's really kind of a fast answer. So that's the main reasons. That's the main difference between either of them. If you are someone who loves the flavor of California extra virgin olive oil because of the olives that they use, olives give off a different flavor. It's sort of like any other fruit. If you eat a raspberry, it's going to taste different than a strawberry, which is going to taste different than a blueberry, which is going to taste different than a plum. There are also dozens of types of plums. So if you eat a black plum, it's going to taste different than a red plum, which is going to taste different than a plumelo. All of those types of things are going to taste different because they're different varieties, they're different types. And so the same is true of olives. Because there are over 100 different types of olives, they each have distinctive flavors and characteristics. And so if you prefer the taste of an olive oil in California, it may be that you actually prefer that specific olive, and so you like that flavor, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, If you prefer an olive oil from Italy, it's because you, again, like that olive, you like the way that flavor tastes, and you like that. Really, more importantly than anything, you want to make sure that you are getting a good product. You want to make sure that it is real. You want to make sure that it comes from a single source. You want to make sure that it is nutritionally dense. And the way to do that is through lab analysis. And I will do an entire show on lab analysis because it's such a huge factor in olive oil production, determining if something is extra virgin olive oil and what you should and should not eat, consume, or purchase for certain reasons. But every reputable olive grove should be lab testing their olive oil every single season to make sure that it is nutrient dense, that it meets the qualifications, that it does all the things that it says it does. That goes for olive companies in California, that goes for olive companies across the Mediterranean basin. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, that is a gold standard that's done. And so if you're making sure that you're checking all of those boxes and what you're getting fits that, then you've got something good and you're good to go. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you one is better than the other. Yes, I own an olive oil company out of Italy. There are various reasons for that that are very personal to me, but also based off of sustainability, farming, agricultural technology, um, just respect for the land, for the climate, respect for the trees themselves, respect for the lab analysis and all of the things that make it nutrient dense and special, and finding partners and people who believe in all of those same things that I believe in is what ultimately took me and made me make that decision. And I stand by it 1,000%, and I will always do that because I've found the community in Italy that believes in those things that are important to me as a nutritionist and that are important to me as what I put in my body and what I put in my family's body, which is also why I promote my products to other people because I want other people to have those types of products for their families as well. So there's a lot of reasons why I chose that. It's not to say, I think a lot of people think that I own an Italian company because I think that it's better than California. That's not the case. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not gonna sit here and say one's better than the other. They're different. I'll say that. They're different in a million ways, and not better, not worse, different. And it all comes down to preference. And so I hope that that answers your question. There's so much more that goes into this answer, really. The most basic part being environment, climate, soil, nutritional content, types of trees, the way they're grown, agricultural practices, all can vary and be very different. And that's farm to farm. That's not even region to region. And so there's a lot that goes into that. So different. I don't know if you thought that was going to be the answer or not, but my main answer is they are different for various reasons. And only you can choose which one you prefer and which one is the most important to you. So that answers the questions for today, and I will be back with the Mediterranean Project to answer more of your questions next time. Thanks for watching.